Hi everyone, I'm Caroline Hill. I'm editor-in-chief of Legal IT Insider, and welcome to Charting Change in Legal, where I'm here with
Ari Kaplan. Hi, everyone. I'm an analyst that covers legal. This is our 10th episode, Caroline. Can you believe it?
right. We're in
Yeah,
double digits.
it's amazing. Wow, this thing has really taken off. I've gotten lots of calls from the legal media, especially those who were in the picture of us with a Chewbacca at at Ilticon, and I can't remember a more entertaining legal event. I really that was a lot of fun. It was great to see you there in person and live, and yeah,
Yeah,
it was nice.
that was a
It was nice to
classic.
catch up.
It was so nice to catch up. It was a classic photo. Us and Chewbacca kind of summed up this ILTA for me.
Yeah, yeah, it
It was
was
a great event. It was great,
it,
and it was great to see you.
it was a great event. It kind of reminded me actually of the value of being at an event in Disney World, to be honest. Like we went to something at Hollywood Studios, and then of course there was the I Managed party at Epcot Center, and there were just lots of opportunities to enjoy that area. I don't feel like with other events in other cities you tend to get that as much. Of course,
No.
you get, if you're in New York City, you get the wonderful place where I grew up. So that's
I have
great.
to say the networking this year was great. We're going to come on to talk about what we spoke about in a bit more detail, but I spoke to Tony McKenna, who's the new president of ILTA, and he was talking about the numbers. And they had like 3,400 people there, roughly. And he was talking about that app that they used, Bizaboo.
Yeah.
And according to the app, he networked with, or he connected with 400 people, which is a lot, right? It's a huge amount. But he pointed out, he's like, it's interesting because it's just a scratch on the surface of the number of people who were there, which is quite an interesting take on it.
Well, one of the things I really like about events like that is that you can do nothing and run into someone that you want to see. And I think that that's a wonderful part of it and one of the reasons why people make the time. And of course, I'm a big fan of Joy Heath Rush, and I remember when ILTA was trying to figure out what to do in the heat of the pandemic. So it's an incredible testament to her leadership, frankly, and to
Indeed.
the volunteers like Tony who have guided that organization. It was I think I only have positive things to say. It was just nice to be around, and I was lucky to be on a panel and to moderate a bunch of other discussions, which I'm happy to talk about. But it was just, there was my sense. I'll just say that my sense of that, summing it up, my sense was legal has come to this watershed moment of realizing that it's not the IT leaders alone or the legal operations leaders alone or the general counsel alone or the law firm partners alone, that this needs to be a holistic approach to driving change in the profession. Otherwise, there's always going to be a gap. There's not going to
Yeah.
be a sufficient amount of buy-in. We're not going to get to this optimal place of technology implementation and experimentation and acceptance. And I felt like this event, because of the programming, the kinds of panels that they offered, the kinds of networking that existed, showed this movement. And we feel like we had entered this new phase of legal, which was very exciting, especially for folks like us who've been
Yeah.
studying it for a long time. And really, it was really a lot of fun.
I think they definitely got more way to go on the in-house side, but they're making great effort, right? Like it's always been tricky to bring those sides together. Obviously, you've got Clock, which has struggled with how to bring law firms on board because they tend to be the ones selling to the legal ops people. So I know that they've been trying to work out for a long time how to connect the two, but without diluting or muddying those channels where legal ops people can network and chat without without having law firms pitching them. And they've had that struggle, and I know that obviously ILTA has always been perceived as being a sort of law firm event, but they did seem to make a big effort this year with bringing legal ops a legal ops stream, which is great to see.
Well, on that note, actually, I was asked to facilitate a 2-day series of discussions with corporate legal leaders. It was called Corporate Legal Day, but I'm assuming they meant corporate legal days, and there were two of them, and it was fascinating because it was a collaboration between ILTA and Clock,
Yeah,
and there was a series of conversations around key issues, and those issues were sparked and led by different participating vendors. And
yeah,
they were not selling, but rather fostering a dialogue where people could freely talk about what the challenges were and had experts from those vendors asking questions and listening and learning. And so it was a great, I can only hope that I will be invited back and that they continue to do this and it grows, because you had the first day, certainly I did a fireside chat with Mike Haven, who's the president of Clock, and also Farrah Pepper, the vice president, was there, and Jack Thompson led it. And it was a really visionary, thoughtful way to get the technologists and the legal operations leaders to align and think about some of these issues. And so
yeah.
I would imagine that the law firm community will be part of that, some set of those conversations going forward.
For sure, for sure. And what were the key, I'll come on to talk about what the key themes are from the G100, but what were the key themes that came out, would you say, from the clock sessions?
I think that what's very interesting to me is, so I'm in the midst of finishing up my research for an annual general counsel report that I do in collaboration with FTI and Relativity. And one of the questions that I ask is, do you have a dedicated legal operations professional in your law department? And because I'm speaking to a cross section of general counsel from all over the world, my ultimate objective is to speak to half in the US and half outside the US. And what's interesting is that when people say yes, then I say, what is the how would you characterize the expansiveness of that person's role? And it's been pretty interesting to see the differences. So I wouldn't say that everyone says, "Oh, legal operations person is the Jane of all trades or the Jack of right. They're the Swiss Army knife of our law department." A lot of people say, "Well, their focus is finance or their focus is tech, and we're hoping that expands, but the team is small." I think that one of the takeaways was, you really need, even if you're a legal operations team of one, there's an expectation now that you're really adept at a lot of different things. I mean, it's a complex role. It's not unlike being a one like a one lawyer law department where the general counsel does everything. That person really needs to know how to navigate key issues, how to balance internal resources and external expense. And I think that was one of the many takeaways. I'm in fact in the process of sort of putting the takeaways together so that I can share it on behalf of Clock and Lilda.
Just as a short aside, I went yesterday to a conference. It was
This whole
talking on
thing is an aside. We're
it.
when we actually talk about substantive stuff, I'm like, wow, that's pretty impressive. The whole thing is a total aside. So yes,
we never have a plan. Like, if the
you
plan is,
started
there
out
is
with a
no
picture of
plan.
us at Chewbacca, so you knew it was going downhill from there.
So I went to Thomson Reuters Legal Leaders Conference in London, and it was all about the corporate legal side, and they had one where they had a bunch of legal ops people on their panel, and they asked the audience. It was interesting, of mostly in-house people, how many legal teams had a legal ops person or team, and only three of them in the audience. It was a relatively big audience. Only three of them raised their hand, which was quite surprising. And then of those, how many of them were not lawyers, aka, they've brought in a sort of professional legal ops person, and there were none. So it's quite interesting, I thought. But yeah, no, I'm glad they're doing I'm glad that Clock's involved because it's for the benefit of everybody, right? Like, but just to go to sort of switch over to the G100. So I talked to Tony McKenna, who is now officially the president. He got elected in May, but he was officially became president. Or he became on the 31st of August. And the G100 session, it's closed. So obviously there's always like a lot of desire to know what people were talking about. and business partners aren't allowed to go. So he shared some of the key themes that came out from that, which I thought was really interesting. And obviously, you won't be surprised to hear that the main one was Gen AI, but it was about how people are going to be using Gen AI in their applications, and what approach they're taking to that. In terms of a lot of people that were present, so that they were looking at making hires, and bringing people in who understood Gen AI to start looking at how to deliver various applications. Tony said that within his firm, he's not taking that approach at all. That because you've got so many business partners, so many vendors developing their own technology, and they've got the expertise, they've got the resource. And that he said that his firm, Howard Kennedy, is very much relying on business partners who have that expertise to help them in an advisory and perhaps delivery capacity, which I thought was quite interesting. And then the other thing that came out, not surprisingly again, was the cost point, which they're talking about, well, it's being pitched as a kind of no-brainer. When you come to the likes of Copilot or Teams, it's being pitched as a no-brainer. But Tony was like, the conversation was around, how are we going to sell that to our CEO and CFO when it costs so much money, right? And he's saying it's all very well to call it a no-brainer, but actually when it costs, so Copilot costs as much as your enterprise license. So obviously the cost structure came out quite recently, and he's saying that it's not insignificant. So there was a lot of conversation around that as well. So I thought that was quite interesting. Perhaps not surprising, but nonetheless quite interesting.
Well, I like these conversations around AI and generative AI, and actually getting to the point of defining what we mean when we're talking about AI, right? I think that's every time I feel like I facilitate a program now, it always starts with some definitional moment. We have to define what we mean by X before we can start talking about the challenges and opportunities and best practices and action plan for going forward. And my sense is that we're kind of getting there. You're starting to see this dialogue, sometimes heated, sometimes colorful, on social media, where people are exchanging ideas, and some people agree, some people disagree. I think it's all really healthy and it's smart. And the one thing that I feel like I'm noticing, especially because when I talk to law firm leaders about this and they ask, well, how much should I focus on generative AI? The question about other fundamental issues around their activities always tend to come up. So, oh, should we launch a generative AI, this or that? And then I say, well, I don't know. How good are your lawyers at getting their time in on schedule? And they all laugh because they're terrible at it. And so that's a much more fundamental issue than whether you should have some piece of technology draft a letter for you. And I think that is what's happening. It's not unlike when I remember when in the old days, every time I seem to want to update like a Palm Pilot, I've now totally dated myself, or some gadget, I inevitably needed like a new computer, and it was super irritating to me. Or I had to delete all of the files in my hard drive so that I can create space for some new software. And I think we're kind of in that moment now where people are trying to figure out, okay, if I do this, and now people are talking about it, what do I need to clean up or fix or right size in my own portfolio that will allow me to get that done, and now I can focus on this new thing? Or could this new thing do that for me? But I feel like people are starting to look at the array of things that they're finding challenging and trying to decide where this fits into that, and can I solve the old problem before I start creating something new. And all really healthy. And I also think we're kind of pushing toward the practical now. It's not theoretical as much. We certainly haven't gotten to the practical, but beyond the wow of it all, we may be getting to a point of just sort of something that's more productive.
I got the sense though that at ILTA that so in fact not just got the sense but spoke to people who were talking to me about, oh, it's all hype, Gen AI, there's so much hype around it. The word hype comes up, and actually just right before the conference, Gartner published its AI cycle, and Gen AI is right at the top of the the curve, and ready to fall down into the trough of disillusionment, which I think has got this great names, like something out of Flash Gordon. But anyway, and so I spoke at the conference and published an article afterwards to Casey Flaherty, who is now Lex Fusion. Obviously, you'll know him from his in-house career as well. And I thought it was, for me, it was really helpful because I feel like people have lulled themselves a little bit into this sense of we can wait, right? There are lots of vendors who are moving into very early stage, quite immature products, right? So they've got the productivity moving, but from a buyer perspective, I think that it's very, very varied, and obviously it depends on the size of the firm and the amount of resource and understanding. There's a lot of confusion, not surprisingly. And so, but Casey was talking about, just because there's hype doesn't mean that it's not an inflection point. And he was saying, it'd be dangerous for people to lull themselves into this feeling that, oh, it's really hyped, we'll wait till things calm down, because he said that where we're at now is, so inflection and hype always go together, right? And he said that right now it's, yes, the products are immature, yes, it's like wave one of legal products, and yes, not all of them are even going to work, but he said there will be another phase where we have second generation products which are better, we'll have more investment, which we've already started to see investment, and he said it's dangerous to wait, because right now you need to be learning. You don't necessarily, he wasn't saying you need to go and start buying every bit of tech under the sun, and particularly if you don't understand it, or particularly if you've got all that work to do, but so now is the time to be learning, understanding, because it's moving so quickly, and that if you wait, that before you know it, you'll be completely out of touch, which I thought was really interesting. I mean, it is going to be a real challenge. It's like, how do firms, they need to make, some of them are, this was something Tony McKenna said actually, that came out of G100 and other conversations, is that people are now creating Gen AI forums, right? So you've got your risk, you've got your marketing, you've got your tech head, and they're coming together to sort of discuss whether it be how, who's involved in learning, and also potentially moving to proof of concept. Quite a lot of firms are sort of playing around with stuff, which I think is really reassuring, although I think a lot of firms are still just in slight panic mode, to be honest with you. From some of the firms I spoke to, they said, we haven't even mastered cloud. We haven't mastered all sorts of things that probably got worse during the pandemic. We haven't mastered a lot of that, like you said. They've got all of these other issues, and now they've got this new thing which they have to be on top of.
Yeah, in a number of my conversations, this issue of policies comes up, and shadow AI issues and preparedness for some of these concerns. And some of the more forward-thinking folks that I feel like I've talked to have suggested creating a policy to sort of give people guardrails, but make that policy broad enough that there's a sense of freedom, that from an in-house perspective, that's just consistent with the idea of legal never being considered the Department of No, because that was historically a concern and a challenge for the legal department to build trust so that people would come to the folks in the legal department as opposed to avoid them because they feel like they would just kill every idea that it was available because of the risk factors. And I think in law firms, there is this understanding, and Tony is going to be a wonderful president, and I've been lucky to know him for a number of years, and he's just a great leader in our space. But he's right. There needs to be this interdependence where the law firms rely on the vendors whose business it is to maximize the deployment of these tools. It's not the business of a law firm to do that, even if you have the smartest technology folks in the room like Tony. So that realization and that suggestion and that recommendation is why he's president of the the International Legal Technology Association, but also one of the most important things that people can take away is, and I think, honestly, I think it just goes all the way back to what I said at first. It was like my key takeaway theme at ILTA, which was that no single group in isolation is going to be able to do this alone. It's why Clock and ILTA have aligned and shared conversations, and it's why someone like Casey, who I have tremendous respect for and I'm a fan of, but he's known for creating the legal tech assessment, a very practical way to gain very fundamental skills that will create tremendous efficiency. And so it's not surprising to me that he's trying to kind of move people from, yes, understanding the deep nuances of what this new application does and could do, but also pushing people into, look, push this button. Like, this is, if you click this, you will be able to automate this and it will transform your work habits. And I think that's kind of what we'd like to see.
But the other really interesting thing, and again, I heard this for you talking about risk, right? So people were saying, I've been talking about risk for forever with in the context, obviously, you've got the privacy issues, you've got all kinds of issues that are very legitimate, real concerns. And then we came onto that, and Casey said, well, before the advent of lawyers using email, he said Professor Richard Susskind, who you and I both talked about, we both have a lot of respect for, he's known for telling people what's going to happen before it happens. When he said that people would be using email as a form of communication, apparently he was everyone said that he was mad, and it was outrageous that he would suggest this, because it was presented a huge risk to client confidentiality. And Casey made the point, he said, well, that is all true. All of the concerns around email are all true. When it comes to discovery, which obviously you're very heavily involved in that world, it makes things much more discoverable, there are so many things that email does not help with, or you've got all sorts of breaches that occur with sharing information to the wrong people, and this has happened, but does that mean that people don't use email? No, it doesn't. And does that mean that it is a risk? Yes, it's a risk, but it's something that people will understand and they'll mitigate against, but it doesn't mean that there's no risk, right? There's a risk in all technology. And I thought, for me, that was really clarifying, because we've been, as sort of my journalist circle, I think we've been approaching this every time with going, right, what are the risks, and we have to be clear about that. It's not that it's wrong to ask these questions, but it's like that kind of acceptance that yes, there are risks, right? There's risks with every technology. Does that mean it's the wrong thing? No. And I thought that, for me, that was quite interesting.
But it's important to recognize, certainly, that when I ask leaders about risks and I say, oh, can you rank your top 5 risks, or what's the greatest risks to business today, they're prioritizing data privacy or data protection or regulatory compliance or the emergence of new data sources or the increased number of disputes and investigations. The implications of artificial intelligence or these new are just have not risen to that level yet, in many ways, because they're either they're not using it or they're not fully understanding where it could be. But there are a number of higher priority risk factors in corporate legal and in law firms, certainly, especially as we start entering this sort of very uncertain economic climate. You see firms are starting to make changes to hiring and make changes to staffing, and there's a potential to be a really challenging moment in the profession. So, and the implications of that, AI on that may be, something that people should be thinking about, but people don't talk about that.
No, they don't.
Oh, it's just a bionic. You'll be bionic. It's not going to do anything. Not a robot, just a bionic lawyer. It's just like a comical. It's like, come on, you some things you won't do anymore, and that will change the nature of what it looks like. But I feel like that's a conversation for another.
It might be because with the cost perspective, when they're talking about cost, there's an acknowledgement that something has to give, right? And that may be a conversation people don't want to have, but it's a reality. There are things that it will speed up, right? It will do the cost is a really interesting conversation, because it will do things much quicker. It will enable things to happen, some things, not everything. The more routine, automatable, is that word, stuff will be, there'll be a cost saving, because it will take someone either, you'll be able to reduce that headcount, being completely frank, but I'm not saying that there won't be jobs, there'll be, different jobs, but, this is just, it's, yeah, I think perhaps more honesty, and again, yeah, I agree for another time, but more honesty is needed in terms of what that really looks like.
Well, also it'll give people, so in the same way, from a career perspective, in the same way that I think people having these healthy, thoughtful discussions about AI, in the same way that I think that will help them figure out what they are getting right and wrong in their portfolios, how their processes work, how they can kind of take care of some of these issues that have been lingering, like getting your time in on schedule, et cetera. I think from a career perspective, people will think, what do I really like doing? I think about this all the time, like what are the things that I love to host my corporate council dinners, right? I love to host the virtual lunch. I love those kinds of things. Some of the sort of deep thought work that I get bogged down in, that's super time consuming. I'm like, oh, is there some other way that I can make that more efficient? I think it will give each of us as individuals, it'll give leaders of organizations the chance to try to figure out, where are people best deployed, and is there an element of that I can remove so that they can do more of what they're great at? So in that sense, I really think there's a bionic aspect to this. But the idea that some people are just doing stuff that they either don't like or not suited to, and technology is gonna take that. I think that's true, and those people, I include myself in this. We really all need to think about, what do we really like to do? What are we really unique at? What are we good at? Where do we want to spend our time? Where do we provide the most value? And that's gives us a real opportunity, which I think is going to be wonderful.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, just as a slight, I'm not going to say aside again, but I spoke to, it's because we talk about this all the time, and in the legal sector, obviously we know all about ChatGPT. You figure that everybody knows about it, but kind of this does have a relevance, even though it doesn't sound it. So I was speaking to a friend of mine about, she wanted to create a match report for her son's rugby team. And I showed her ChatGPT, right? She was like, oh, I don't think it's going to be possible because we can't write all this content. None of the parents are volunteering to help. And I showed her with the most basic, tiny information about so-and-so scored a try, so-and-so scored a try, generate a match report. I showed her ChatGPT, and it was like I'd done something magic, right? Because obviously it immediately creates this brilliant match report. And she literally looked at me like, what is this witchcraft, right? And it was the most amazing thing to see. Like, she literally just looked at me like, what just happened? And it had her son's name in it. He scored the first try in a thrilling match, blah blah blah. She just went, how did you do this? And it kind of goes to that point, like so within our work life, I don't use it really, to be honest with you. I don't know why. I should really use it more, but yeah, there's going to be all sorts of things where people are going to be using it, and it's going to be like magic, right? It's going to be magic in terms of taking time away from things that do not need to take all that time. They don't need to anymore. They just don't. Marketing is going to be able to generate quite potentially cool material at the with just very basic information, as long as they read it and make sure that it's not rubbish.
Well, just to ensure that people who are listening know that this entire discussion is a complete aside, I will digress and say that when my daughter was little and played soccer, she played soccer with all of her best friends, and we're very close to the parents of those children, and my friend, one of the parents, and his name happens to also be Ari, and so we used to co-author or share responsibility for the write-ups for these games. And I love my daughter and all the, I love these kids, but the games were super boring. And so, we one team would score one goal, and we knew that was an insurmountable lead. And the game would, they're little kids. And so we would write up these ridiculous summaries of the game, Oh, and Susie flew in the air like, with wings. She catapulted and just barely missed the goal, and we were just like, it almost touched the net, but it ended up hitting I think it hit a parent. And like, we would just make up all kind. I would wonder to compare our write-ups of those games with ChatGPT and see who
You
would
should do
come
it.
out victorious.
You
Wow.
should
The
do it.
wings of Nike. Anyway,
I think yours win. I think yours win. I'm not gonna lie. Like
we had so
even
much fun, and we would send it to each other, be like, "Oh, don't forget Johnny, the brother who ran onto the field." It was just like such a funny. We would be like, "Yes, that's right." Really
hey,
fun.
listen, before we wrap up, and I guess we should probably leave it on this. I just
Yeah.
wanted to give you a kind of
Compliment.
no, I just want to give you like some
Suggestion for how I could make everything better.
your run. So Tony mentioned to me, and I just wanted to give you credit for this. So your Wednesday run that you do at ILTA, coming back to that, going back from our child stories. So you did a run on the Wednesday morning at 6, as you usually do, and Tony said that it was one of the highlights of his conference because you gave a little talk at the beginning. And I don't know if you want to share, but Tony said it was really meaningful because you shared that. Do you mind me saying?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to say it. So I run in memory of my friend Alex Hannon, who was a young man who had developed lung cancer, never smoked, but was a runner. And I've done many of these at any of the legal conferences that I attend. I try to host a run, partially because I want to make sure to run and it kind of holds me accountable. But I've learned that there are a lot of people that would like to have other people to run with, especially because early it's dark and it's, it kind of motivates you. But at the beginning of every run, I always say, we're busy and it's early, but gosh, how lucky we are to wake up, have air in our lungs, and be able to be with colleagues and friends and just run.
And
Fast. Oh, yeah.
that was really meaningful to Tony. He
Uh,
said, "Do you know what?" He said it was the highlight of his conference, and he said that for him summarized the spirit of the sector. And so I just wanted to
that's
give you
awesome.
credit for that. Yeah, it was really meaningful. And do you know what? This is an unusually serious note for us to end on, but I guess we probably have to wrap up. Otherwise, you and I will be like,
Yeah. All right. Well, have next time when you want to say that, have another compliment. I love to end on a compliment, and also think of my friend Alex, and also of running. So I'm hosting another run at Relativity Fest, which is always, they do a really nice job as well. So we'll see if we can exceed the numbers, but certainly I'll close with the fact that this was the first time I'd ever been at a conference where I was hosting a run, where I was confident I would not be alone. So
oh,
yeah, no, you never know. I mean, I've never been alone. There are always people show up, but it's always like, oh, is anybody going to come? But at this one, I knew that people were coming, and I knew it was a great crowd and a great community, and I was honored to be there. So, Caroline,
well done.
great conversation. This entire aside has been fantastic, and I look forward
We
to our
should
next
change the name. It's Carolyn and Ari's aside.
aside, AKA. That's what Johnny
Until
Change
next.
Legal, aka the long
Hey,
aside.
the longest time.
Anyway,
We've got to rebrand.
sorry.
Okay, until next time.
All right, thank you.